So today's webinar is going to showcase 3 community rail case studies, each one different and each one sharing good practice in community engagement. Although community rail generally strives to be diverse in its engagement, we hope that today's case studies will provide inspiration for adopting even more diverse approaches across community rail. Our external specialist from Third Sector Network will also round off the webinar and help us to look at how we might engage and empower our diverse communities even better. And as well as hearing from our panellists, we'd also like to hear from you. So make use of the discussion sessions and use the chat to share your thoughts, ideas and experiences. One quick reminder, if you are inspired to explore any training related to today's topics, then you can apply for our training bursaries. The application form and guidelines are on our website and can be downloaded from the training and development page, and there will be a link to that appearing in the chat shortly. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our panellists today. We have Julia Singleton-Tasker from Heart of England CRP. We have Dawn Lyle from For the Region. Then after the break, we'll be joined by Fatima Balm from Gloucestershire CRP, and then Joe Green from Third Sector Network. So I hope you're all going to enjoy what's coming up. And Julia, I'm going to hand straight over to you to kick us off. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sarah. Right, I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this works. It worked in practice. It should work now. If it doesn't, we'll do something. So hopefully you can all see that first slide.
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, great. I can't see anybody now, so I'm just going to talk and hopefully it all works. Just let me know if for some reason you don't hear sound when there's a video or it doesn't move on. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to come along and speak today. I'm going to be talking about our Coventry Station Community Day, which we held back in May. It seems a very long time ago now. And it was a really fantastic day for one, doing an event, a live event with lots of people after 2 years of COVID and, you know, having to hold back on doing those events where you do get to interact with your local communities. And it just, there was so much happening in Coventry at the time. It was a really wonderful way to celebrate all the amazing things that are happening in the city. So the background to the project, has that changed slides for you? Okay, sorry, I'm having a few issues on my end. There we go. So the background to the project, I was asked to be part of a Coventry Station working group, which included people from Avanti West Coast and Coventry City Council. The old listed building prior to COVID had stopped being, it needed investment, it needed more space because the amount of footfall of people passing through it. So the decision was that there was going to be a new Coventry Station building being built. It was an £82 million investment into that new station building. The listed building, which they couldn't touch structurally, they have to sort of keep it as it is, was having investment to get it cleaned up, to get parts renovated. We got different bits of artwork into it as well. So there was a lot happening in the station. As well as that, we also had a new visitor hub that was put in place just outside the station by Coventry City Council, which was going to be a first port of call for people coming into the city. We'd had the Coventry City of Culture, which finished in May this year after having been delayed by COVID. And there was also the Birmingham 2022 Commonwealth Games on the horizon, sort of in the summer. So there was a huge amount of activity around Coventry and a lot of a buzz around the place. And after having been in lockdowns and not really being able to do a whole lot to promote the railways to get people to come to the city, we really wanted to celebrate what was happening. We wanted to celebrate not only the big events like the City of Culture and the Commonwealth Games, but we also wanted to celebrate the transport innovation that was happening within the city as well. So just opposite from the station, the world's first urban airport was built. It was only a temporary structure, but it was there just in time for our community day. There's also plans for very light railway in Coventry. We've got the West Midlands cycle hire scheme, so you can hire bikes and e-bikes from right outside the station and go all over the city. There's also been an introduction of pedicabs. just a lot of things happening. And yeah, as I said, we just really wanted to celebrate it. So working with Avanti West Coast and Coventry City Council, they were our main partners. We started to think about this idea of having a community day where we could showcase all these wonderful things happening and also invite members of the community to be a part of it and sort of take ownership of it a little bit as well. At the same time, by complete coincidence, a physical theatre company called Highly Sprung, they approached me with an idea for a performance that they wanted to do. And they were working with different schools through another scheme called Commonwealth Connections. And they had this idea of developing a performance piece around the railways and connections. And it just tied in perfectly with what we wanted to do at the station. So they came on board as partners to the project as well. Which was great because they are very well established in Coventry. They've got a lot of links with local schools, local organisations and local charities. And the performance piece was a real community piece. It was informed by the students. The students got to decide how they would tell this particular story. I'll show you a bit of a clip of it later on and explain a little bit more about it then. So we had all the component parts we had an idea of what we wanted to do. And this was just before Christmas last year. And then we had to find the funding for the project. Luckily, we did get funding from Avanti West Coast and Coventry City Council, which enabled us to do the whole day. I'm going to be honest, we had confirmation of the funding and of the date of the day a month before the day was actually happening. So as you can imagine, by this point, it was all hands on deck to try and get this massive event happening. Luckily, the day went really well. We asked Highly Sprung to help us out because they've got those local connections, and we hired a local event producer who had connections with different creatives in the city. So we put together a program. We had a main stage program to showcase some of the performers, some of the singers and dancers, and we also had an interactive program where we had different stalls. So we focused on 3 main elements really. The first one was active travel. We wanted, again, for people to see how easy it was to get to the station without using their car, even though if you see the massive red building in the top right hand corner, that is a car park. So there's a huge car park at Coventry Station now, but we still want people to think about using their bikes, walking, using public transport to get to the station. So we invited the local Dr. Bike, West Midlands Combined Authority also came along and did security checking. And we also did some bikeability sessions for kids. So we were getting families who wanted to come to have the bikeability sessions, but then were also able to enjoy the rest of the day as well and sort of see all the other stalls that we had there. The bikeability sessions were fully booked, and even on the day we had people coming up still wanting to join in. So that was a really great way to give back to the local community as well. It wasn't just come along, come and enjoy a day. It was, okay, well, we're going to teach your children how to ride their bike safely. We're going to showcase all these things, you know, how they can access the station with their bikes as well. So the second part that we focused on was we really wanted family activities. We wanted things that would engage young children, older children, adults, and get them interested in the potential of the station and of the area as well. We wanted to showcase the boulevard in front of Coventry Station as a place where communities could come and host events in the future. It's a really fantastic space. It's pedestrianised. There is quite a lot of building work happening there at the moment, but when it's all finished, it will just be a lovely place to host events. So again, we wanted the people involved and the people running the stalls to be local to Coventry or Warwickshire. So from the CRP, we had a local artist, Emily, who did an activity with children to get them to design their own train. And she was able to talk to, you know, some of the older ones a little bit about sustainability. The younger ones just had fun with glitter and paint and felt tips. And they created some beautiful, colourful trains. And at the same time as well, I was also on the stall and I was able to chat to the parents of the children about the station and just open up that conversation with them. So rather than just sort of giving out leaflets, which we tend to find that people might look at them and take them, but then quite a lot of the time they sort of get thrown away and people don't really engage on a long-term basis with it. Because we had this lovely activity, we had a chance just to chat to people much more informally. We had a lot more people kind of responding to us and being open to what we were letting them know about. We had a local henna artist who came along and decorated people's hands, and we also had Coventry Transport Museum. So Coventry Transport Museum, it's an amazing museum, but they have a really strong focus on cars and bikes, and there's not much about trains or railways in there at the moment. So we've been working with them as well to try and offer some more rail-based activities at the museum. And then they also joined our community day to provide activities for children. So the bottom picture in the middle, that's all the stuff that they set up. So again, because Coventry Transport Museum are very well known in the local area, they were able to use their channels to help to promote the day. They were able to encourage people to come along. And again, they got children involved. They got them feeling a part of the day, not just kind of walking through it and not being able to join in and do the activities. We also found that some parents, you know, their kids were happily playing and they would come and speak to us and find out a bit more about Avanti West Coast, or they'd go and have a quick look at the urban airport, the sort of the model. So there was a real benefit to having activities for the whole family to be able to enjoy. And even if it's not an obvious rail activity, it created those opportunities for conversations with people. So we also wanted to showcase the transport innovation that's happening in the city. So we invited all the TOCs that pass through Coventry to come along and host a stall. And we kept it quite open. We said, you know, if you want to come and just give out information about what you're doing, about the innovation that's happening within the rail industry, or if you want to lead an activity, then you're more than welcome to. And along with West Midlands Rail Exec, Avanti West Coast came along and they were able to talk to people about sustainability and what they're doing in their organisation to be more sustainable and help to develop their company. It was really good as well because the railway station staff came out throughout the day as well and would be at the stall and chat to people. And they were able to say, you know, we work just in that building there. So it's helping people to become familiar with those faces in the station. So if somebody is a bit more nervous about travelling by train, it's always nice if they know a friendly face already that they can go and chat to. So it was great that the station staff got involved as well and sort of came out and chatted to people. We had, as I mentioned before, the urban airport, which was just opposite Coventry Station, and Coventry City Council also came along and had a 3D model of it. Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get to go into the urban airport. I just didn't have time. But people who were interested at seeing the model were able to then book in a session to go and have a look around the urban airport and sort of see what it was all about. So that was the daytime activities. And while all this was happening on with our different stalls, we had local food, refreshment trucks there as well. And our event producer had a load of links with local performers and dance troupes and singers. So we were able to showcase a real variety of the creative talent within the West Midlands, within Coventry. We had the Jazz Apples, who are a Midlands-based jazz duo. We had John Bernard, who is a spoken word poet and artist, and he's the photo in the middle with the little kid dancing. We had a DJ, we had Sandra Godley hosting, we had local dance troupes, and we had a Bhangra dance troupe as well. So it all helped to showcase the diversity that there is in Coventry and the West Midlands, and the sheer range of performers and choices and things on offer within the county. I'm just going to take a little sip of water. And again, because we had from Coventry Station, the main thoroughfare to the city is that boulevard, and because we had all these different things happening, people were stopping to talk and to engage. And whereas again we sort of took the view that if we just had information stands, I think people would have just passed through them. They wouldn't have been engaged by them. They wouldn't have stopped and had those informal chats, which can be so important. So having all this activity not only showcase, you know, Coventry as a city of culture, showcase all the wonderful transport innovation, but it just opened up so many conversations with people as well. At the end of the day, we had Highly Sprung do their performance. So they worked with 6 schools around Coventry. So again, it was all school engagement, young people informing how they chose to express a story. And they did a performance piece based around the railways connecting people and places. And they looked at how the railways started off and then going through the Industrial Revolution, and then how we're now developing trains that are more environmentally friendly and more sustainable. And again, how the railways are connecting places and people. So the schools worked for the term beforehand, leading up to it, with a cast of professional performers as well. And I'm just going to show you a little clip from the performance. So hopefully this will work. Please let me know if you don't hear the sound, and just enjoy 1 minute and a bit of the performance. So I think that video really showcases how amazing the space is in front of the station and the potential to do more there. Sorry, I've got a tickly throat now, talking too much. So after the event, we obviously wanted to evaluate how the day was perceived by the community, how engaged they felt, and we wanted to take forward the lessons and find out ways that we could continue to work with the different communities and different groups that we've built up these relationships with. So we did do a survey, and I won't go into too much detail because these slides will get shared out, but generally people absolutely loved the day. They loved the performances of In Transit. We ticketed In Transit, although it was free, because we had to block off space for it and have barriers. So we had 600 people attending 2 performances, and we estimate we had about 1,500 people overall attending the community day. Out of that, we have worked with one of the schools who took part in the In Transit performance, and we've just done a whole rail week. So we had 120 Year 8 students for a whole week doing railway themed activities. We've got plans for another Coventry Station Community Day in 2023, where again we'll be able to use those relationships we've built up with the local organisations that took part in the Innovation Day and took part in the In Transit performance. So hopefully they'll come back. And we've got more projects with Highly Sprung. We've just finished a project with them, and with groups of Syrian refugees. So they've brought their magic to some of our projects. And the whole thing was a real learning experience. Having never done anything on that sort of size or scale, I think going forwards now, when we do future community days, we know what works, we know what doesn't work, and we know how we can ask communities to get involved, and we can find ways to continue to improve that year on year. We had great feedback from the day. Again, people felt very much a part of the city. They could see how the community day represented what was happening in their local communities and how it really celebrated what was special about transport innovation, about culture and creativity within Coventry, which is what we wanted to do. And generally people felt more connected to the station as well, and felt it became more part of their city rather than just kind of that extra building towards the south that people just used to travel in and out. So yeah, a really fantastic day, hard work, and hopefully next time we won't just have a month to put it all together. But it was just brilliant. So I'm going to stop there, especially since my throat is about to go, as I need to go and have some more water. But if you do want to read the full Community Day report, and we also have a photo book, then you can download it from our website. And also, please just get in touch if you ever want more information or to find out more about the day as a whole. So I think now I'm going to pass on to Dawn, who's the next panelist for today.
Oh, thanks, Julia. Really fantastic event, and really great to see the photos and videos of that. And I can imagine that was a little stressful with a month to go, but often that is the way these things happen, isn't it? They all come together in the last minute. So yeah, great to hear about that project. So I'm Dawn Lyle, and I'm here on behalf of South West Wales Connected. We're the community rail partnership for the 4 counties of South West Wales. So I am in Swansea, and we also cover Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire and Neath Talbot. So that's our region. And my organisation is for the region. So we're a community interest company as the hosts of the Community Rail Partnership. And we work really closely with Transport for Wales to deliver a regional community rail partnership. Now, what was sort of different and challenging for us is that we launched South West Wales Connected during the pandemic. So we sort of launched ourselves. We were founded in March 2020. And so that was sort of a challenging time to start a community engagement organisation. And so what I'm going to sort of talk about today is how we used online methods to engage communities across our region. We had a couple of challenges, not least the fact that we're quite a large region, spread out geographically, and then obviously, of course, we couldn't get out and about and see people. We couldn't really promote rail travel. So what do you do as a community rail partnership just launching when the world goes into lockdown? So that was our challenge. And as a community interest company, we're really passionate about kind of the economic and social development of South West Wales. So we'd like to think that we're a community rail partnership that's not about trains, but it's about leveraging the benefit of those services, but also promoting placemaking around train stations, community involvement, and a few keywords really. And we use this term a lot. Co-production is kind of really intrinsic to what we're all about. We really want to be a vehicle for communities to co-create solutions, to collaborate and to get involved. So whatever we do, we want it to be co-produced, and that goes for everything we do, including the name of our community rail partnership. We kind of co-produced that with by bringing together lots of different people from the tourism sector, from communities, local residents around train stations, and said, what is the purpose of our organisation and what should it be called? So co-production is kind of one of our really core values. So we took to Zoom really as a way of engaging with communities, and I think there are pros and cons to that, and I don't need to rehearse old conversations here, but obviously some people feel that Zoom is excluding members of the community, and of course there are those members of the community that do find Zoom challenging or haven't got access to the internet or wouldn't join a Zoom call. But actually we found that we were able to engage with a really wide diversity of people over Zoom, and people of all different ages, and I suppose it was lockdown, so people were stuck at home, so they were more inclined to look at these new technologies as ways to engage with, get involved in things. But it worked really well for us, and it also cut down the barriers that some people have around not being able to attend meetings. And we still use Zoom a lot now for a lot of these community engagement, community conversations, because if you've got childcare challenges or mobility challenges, sometimes a Zoom meeting, as we know, is easier to attend, and especially as we're working across a large region, we find that it cuts down travel challenges, which are a big issue across South West Wales. So we came up with a concept that we call shared vision meetings. So what we wanted to do was really get to know communities and people around the train stations. You establish a new organisation, you know that you're supposed to be engaging with communities, And so the key challenge is, how do you really kind of get to know who's doing what, who already exists? You don't want to tread on anybody's toes, but you want to kind of present your organisation as a new vehicle for making change happen in local communities across South West Wales. And we really wanted to have an opportunity to kind of listen and learn what are the key issues for people around train stations in our region. We were new to railway working, so we just wanted to open up our doors to learn and listen to people, and we embraced this approach called asset-based community development, which is this idea that local people and local organizations themselves and communities themselves have the solutions, they have the assets and the strengths, that all we actually need to do is support people to tap into the resources and strengths and assets that are already on our doorsteps. So we didn't want to be a kind of organisation coming in with a top-down thing, like we are going to, deliver this project, we're going to run this event. We wanted to be much more like, what would you like to do, and how would you like to be involved, and what would you like to see happen? So our key role in this was, we saw ourselves as facilitators. So we wanted to facilitate communities to talk to each other and to talk to us, and then to hopefully make things happen. And as it says here, often in order to empower local communities, sometimes that means getting out of the way, sometimes that means kind of granting people permission. And I think that's a funny one, because of course we don't need permission, do we, as individuals, to make change happen on our doorsteps, but there is something about people feeling like it's not their place to run a community event or make start a community garden or something like that. So there's something about creating space for that and kind of inviting people to get involved. So we set up a number of these shared vision meetings. Now, this is a sort of hyper-local approach. So around various different train stations across our region, we hosted these shared vision meetings. And that starts with, the key thing is to get the broadest possible diversity of different people, different perspectives into a conversation as possible. And I think that starts with being really mindful about how you invite people. So we wanted to make sure our language was really, really welcoming. We wanted to really make sure that people didn't feel like this meeting wasn't for them. So everyone who lives, works and spends time in a particular place, what would you like to see and how can we make it happen? So a really positive asset-based approach to our language, giving people an idea of the sorts of things we were going to be talking about. And Julia mentioned this when she was talking about the event in Coventry, the importance of working with local partners who already have good community engagement. So in each of the local places, we tried to identify a couple of organisations to help us with getting the word out there to local people and encouraging them to come. And so in each case, we had some partnerships already in place. And the way that we got buy-in from those local partners is that we gave them a speaking slot in the meeting. So just a 5-minute platform for local partners to update on what they were up to. We found that a really effective method to encourage local organisations to get involved, to come along, to help share the invitations across their contacts and that sort of thing. There's something really intentional about a shared vision meeting, which is about designing a conversation around generative questions. And it's taking what we call a kind of appreciative inquiry approach, which is, again, all these buzzwords really for kind of strength-based, asset-based community development. But it's really easy, isn't it, to get into a conversation about what everyone is miserable about. And everything that's wrong with the train services and everything that's wrong with a local station. And we can all get stuck into a conversation like that. And if you're not careful, in our experience, particularly around kind of train station conversations, you can create really negative conversation where all anyone wants to do is complain about maybe the lack of services or delinquency or whatever it might be. So we were really intentional about saying this is going to be a positive, appreciative inquiry conversation built around questions that invite us to have a more hopeful and more empowering conversation. And the way that we design these conversations it sort of falls into these 6 pots. So we start by asking people why this meeting is important to them. Again, it's easy to stand up on a stage or on a Zoom stage and say, you know, we think that, you know, there's lots to be done around here, and we think this area really needs X, Y, and Z. And it's actually much more interesting for people and much more empowering to have a conversation where we ask them, why is this important to them? And, you know, just sort of beautiful responses start to emerge when you ask positive and appreciative inquiry questions like this, because people tap into their own sense of purpose and they listen to each other. And there's a kind of choreography to this as well, which is about giving people some time to reflect. I'm going to share some resources at the end of this for a little bit more of an in-depth about how you might, you know, the importance of these different questions. But so connecting to purpose is the first thing. Why does this meeting feel important to you? Connecting to strengths. So starting with what's already working well, what we already love about a local place. And this immediately puts the conversation onto a much more positive footing. And, you know, wherever you go, whatever sort of local challenges there are in a local community, if you ask people what they love about their local places, they will tell you. And there are lots of, you know, people do love where they live. And if they're invited to share those things, it's a really inspiring discussion. And then what would you love to see? So this was sort of the meat of the discussion, really, is we wanted to kind of crowdsource ideas, really understand what local people wanted, and like, yeah, get them to share the kinds of things that they would love to see. And then the key point again was about empowering and involving local people. So the next question was, what shall we do? And we is important here, because it wasn't about them telling us what they think needs to happen. It was trying to create that collaborative feeling within the meeting of like, we are all here because we care about Llanelli or Pembroke Dock. And what can we do? You know, as a community rail partnership and as an existing community interest company working in the region, of course, we have a number of resources that we can bring to any potential project or idea. So we have our own assets to bring to the conversation. We can help connect people with key decision makers, or we can talk to the rail operators or the local authorities and local businesses. But we're just one member of that discussion, and we really wanted people and organizations within the community to say, oh, well, we want to do this and that, and we have a venue, or we have, you know, some ideas, we have certain skills. So what would you like to be involved with? These are just some of the sort of notes that we took during each meeting, and we shared these kind of graphics live during the conversations to kind of capture what everybody was saying, and it kind of gives you a little sense of the kinds of things that people were talking about. This one was around Haverfordwest, what people would love to see. And you know, the amazing thing about these kinds of conversations is people really connect around, you start to realize how much of what we want for our local places is similar, you know, how much we want many of the same things, and giving people the opportunity to kind of share their ideas. And then what shall we do, you know, so after a really nice conversation about what we'd love to see, then that kind of moves into a really practical thing about the kinds of projects that we could initiate together around local places. Now, I will say that one of the challenges here was that obviously we were crowdsourcing more ideas than we knew what to do with, really. And the key was to sort of identify opportunities for local people to lead on things. And I'll come on to a little bit about how we sort of did that. But you can see that there were some really great ideas emerging from these discussions, and looking at this now kind of a year on from this meeting, I can see that we've, you know, moved forward with quite a lot of these ideas, and then it reminds me to kind of go back and follow up with some of the others. But you can see how effective these discussions were for crowdsourcing the things that, you know, the possibilities in local places. I said I'd just share with you a resource. This is a little bit of a blatant plug, but I was invited to do a TEDx talk at Swansea TEDx last year about shared vision meetings. These slides will be shared later, but if you want to hear me talking for 18 minutes about shared vision meetings and how to put together those conversations, you can look up my TED talk on that. So then we were sort of left with all these ideas, members of the community that really wanted to do things. It had been a really effective way of meeting and getting to know lots of different community groups, local charities, a few local businesses, and people, you know, local sort of activists and, let's say, busybodies around train stations. It had been really great for us to build those relationships and get to know people. And the next question really was actually, how can we support these people and groups to make some of these ideas happen? So we came up with this idea of a community changemakers fund, and this was part funded by Transport for Wales, and we had a bit of money from Great Western Railway. And the first time we ran this funding pot, I have a feeling we only had about it was a funding pot of £16,000, and we've run it twice now, and we've just opened it again for the third year, and we're trying to grow the pot with contributions from local businesses as well. But the Community Changemakers Fund was a little funding pot. As I say, it started off only £16,000, and people could apply for funding from £300 to £1,000 for any local projects that would enhance community wellbeing or improve the visitor experience and placemaking around their local station. And this was really, we thought, if we could just put a little bit of money, make a little bit of money available to say that, look, like those ideas and projects, concepts that emerged from the shared vision meetings, that we could actually support those to happen. And again, you know, if you're looking for a way to build relationships with people, organisations, groups, charities across your region, then launching a small funding pot is clearly like an amazing way to do that, because we were way oversubscribed. The news about our funding pot was shared far and wide. People are always looking for new funding and grant schemes to get involved with. So it was a great way to build, build our profile and get to know who was doing what across the region. We assembled a decision-making panel, key organisations. And it meant that of all those great ideas, we could actually support some of them to happen. So I haven't got time to cover all the amazing things that we've been able to support, but things like community gardens and benches in key places, a lovely project to create artwork, murals. A couple of our projects have been about creating kind of placemaking murals. There have been kind of community events, days, community days, boat trips. There's a project we've supported to help young people and skills in a community around digital tech. All sorts of amazing things that we just feel really honoured and proud to even just be a little part of. And all of these organisations now feel a relationship with us as a community rail partnership, that they had a little bit of funding and that we were able to support them to do something lovely within the locality around their train station. And it's been so successful that we have, as I say, launched it again, and we run it every year now. And it really means that when we host a shared vision meeting, we're not just walking away saying, okay, lots of great ideas, good luck with that, but we are able then to maintain that relationship and see those projects happen with a little bit of support from us. And now this slide, my community rail officer, Ashley, has put this together from the first time we ran the project. So you can see that with only £16,000, we supported 21 projects across our region, and we improved placemaking. We created lots of volunteering opportunities. We engaged with over 600 people through that process, and all of this during COVID-19 restrictions. So I think it goes to show that there's loads you can do, even when no one can get out and about and actually engage with communities directly. And we've run that Community Changemakers Fund again this year, and our community rail officer and our assistant community rail officer have been going out, meeting all of the different projects that we've supported and like getting to know the people. And one of the things that that's important to us, we have our core steering group that meets online on a bi-monthly basis, but we also have what we call our wider steering group, and we've just rebranded that and we now call it Connected to Travel and Tourism. But the wider steering group meeting is a really open to all it's open to all. So building these relationships with organisations and groups and businesses across the region, we then invite them to come along every 2 months to an online steering group meeting for the Community Rail Partnership. So again, it comes back to our commitment to co-production and determination to keep local people and groups involved in everything we're doing. So that's a whistle-stop tour of our project. I hope that's been useful, and I think we're opening up to a panel discussion, so I'll hand back to Sarah. Thank you very much.
That's great, Dawn, thank you, and bang on time as well, both you and Julia, brilliant, and 2 really different presentations there. So I'm going to open up immediately for discussion. I can see we've already got 1 question in the chat, but if anybody has got further questions, just pop your hands up, and Julia and Dawn will be able to come in and answer those. But we'll kick off quickly a question from Gary at Kent CRP. So this one's aimed at you, Julia, I think, which was asking how was the attendance at the activity day? How is the attendance of the various providers funded for that community day?
Yeah, so it was all funded through Avanti West Coast and Coventry City Council. So we applied for both, hoping that they would both match fund each other, and they did, thankfully. But yeah, like I said, it was a bit of a last minute, yes, you have definitely got the funding. I think if we hadn't been successful, then we would have applied probably through Community Rail Network, and I would have looked for other sort of local funding pots as well. Luckily, I didn't have to do that, but I was trying to research things to have as backups just in case. And we also made sure that when we planned the project, it was scalable as well. So if we didn't have the budget for all the bells and whistles, it would be a smaller version of what we had planned. Again, just, yeah, hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
Yeah, I think that's really important, isn't it, when it comes to budgeting these types of community days, to have your, the absolute what we want, but also have your backup as well. And I know you said obviously your plans are in process looking for next year. And are you hoping to get funding from the same sources again? Is that the main aim?
Hopefully, yeah, hopefully we'll get funding. It'll probably be a smaller event this year, just because of the amount of other projects that we've also got going on, and we're tying it into some of our another project that we're doing from January. So there's going to be a bit of a theme to it. Yeah, I need to. We've got another Coventry joint working group meeting this afternoon, so we'll be talking about it then, sort of starting to look at where we can get all the funding pots and various places.
Excellent, sounds great. Okay, thank you. Hopefully that answers your question, Gary, but if it doesn't, just pop your hand up and we'll bring you into the chat. So just having a look to see if there's anything else within the chat. No hands up. Oh, is there one?
Yeah, there is.
Yes, Colin.
Sarah.
Yeah. Yeah. Colin, do you want to come in? Hazel, if you can unmute for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I've asked Colin to unmute. He doesn't seem to be unmuting.
Muted myself.
Ah, there you are.
I unmuted myself. Somebody muted me. I come from the Worcestershire Community Rail Partnership, and I was fascinated by Dawn's talk, because communicate with is a challenge for everybody, I suggest. So I'd be interested in how, lovely to have this two-way conversation. How did you identify the people you go and have the conversation with?
We took the view that people will self-select. So really our doors were open to anyone that resonated with the invitations that we were putting out there to come and have these conversations. And I think that is really important, not to prejudge who might turn up. But certainly, desk-based research into who were the local organisations around train stations, third sector organisations in particular. But we also invited local businesses, local cafes and taxi firms, and worked quite hard. You know, you can publish something on social media and put a few posters around, which is what we do now that we're out of lockdown. I should have said that when we run these, we run around the place putting posters up in local shops and cafes. But we do work quite hard to open it up to everybody, and not prejudge who to connect with, if that makes sense.
Yes, thanks very much. That's exactly what we do. But I was really wondering if you've got a little secret tucked away somewhere, which enable us to widen the search and get people to respond. It's the response rather than the invitation. How do we stimulate a response to make the message clear that we're there to help people?
Yeah, it is challenging, that, isn't it? Yeah, challenging. I do think there's something, you know, making sure the language is lively and welcoming, and you've got to specifically say that everyone is invited, I think. And finding those partner organisations to bring along their friends is useful as well.
I thought it was interesting, Dawn, in your presentation, following on from that point where you talked about with the partner organisations, you gave them a little bit of a hook to come along by talking about kind of what they had going on within the communities. And I guess there's opportunity to do that as well with other communities if they're doing something and you can see they're being particularly active and you want to bring them in on a conversation, to perhaps that could be a hook to bring them in as well, to talk a little bit about what they've been doing. So
that always works. Thanks for reminding me. You know, when you really want someone to attend a meeting, giving them a little speaking slot gets them there. So yeah, definitely.
Great. Okay, I think we've got a couple of comments in the chat as well. So there was something, I think, from Peter Long aimed at you, Dawn, just saying, so his comment was you didn't mention the current Transport for Wales Transport Facilitators recruitment programme to expand transport users' views. Is that something you're aware of, want to mention?
Well, only briefly to say really that this may be the case elsewhere across the network. I only really know what's happening in Wales, but in Wales, Transport for Wales are quite clear that the role of a community rail partnership is quite separate from other stakeholder forums that they host, and they really want us to keep those conversations about services out of they're not in our remit, which is nice in some ways because it means that our conversations don't get bogged down in timetable changes and lack of services. So I think the facilitator recruitment process is on the stakeholder engagement side, where they are always looking for people to run those stakeholder engagement meetings. And I can only think that might be a little bit of a soul-destroying job, because you're actually coming up against a lot of disappointment from communities and people very frustrated with the lack of services and that sort of thing. So I guess it's hard to recruit for. But just to say that in Wales, they keep telling us not to get engaged in conversations about services and to really keep that community focus.
Right. Okay, thank you. I think Sarah Greasewood, if that's correct pronunciation, apologies if not, but if we could unmute her, she's got a question as well.
Hiya, my name's Sarah. I'm in East Sussex, working for South East Communities Rail Partnership. Just wanted to say, Dawn, I really appreciated that in the beginning of your presentation, using those words, this is not about rail, because I think one of the hardest things, because I'm quite new to this job, is how to explain what community rail partnerships are. And I think it's really key to say that you can't fix train times, you can't fix quite a lot of things. And I just wondered if you had any other tips for explaining what community rail is, briefly. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, we have found that there's a certain demographic of people who are really interested in trains, and and those people are naturally drawn towards your community rail partnership because they think that it's an opportunity for them to talk about trains. And we really wanted to reach out more widely than that and engage with a whole new demographic of people and a broader audience. And we kind of coined this phrase about it's not about services and timetables, it's about leveraging the value of the railway in communities. So, you know, and we're focused around those communities that have got train stations, but it's about leveraging the benefit of those train stations in communities. So we're talking about train stations as community hubs. We've done a lot of work around the kind of visitor experience. What does it feel like when you get off the train in these places, creating kind of welcome banners, engaging with local people to say, how can we highlight the hidden gems in your local places? So much more of a visitor focus and like placemaking around the train stations. Yeah, we find that is a more interesting conversation to lots of different groups and people. But yeah, we have to state it. We sort of state it at the beginning of every meeting almost, like this meeting is not about trains, it's not about services, it's about leveraging the benefit of the railway for the community and enhancing your local place.
Great, thanks, Dawn. Right, I'm conscious we've run a couple of minutes over. I know there's a question from Andy in the chat, and I think there's a comment from Dawn as well in the chat. So we'll come back to those at the later panel discussion, if that's okay, not to go too far over. And we'll break here for a tea coffee break. So if I can ask everybody to come back at 11:07, which from Gloucestershire CRP, who's going to share her presentation with us. So over to you, Fatima.
Oh, thank you. So, hi everyone. I'm Fatima. I'm the Community Rail Development Officer at Gloucestershire Community Rail Partnership, and today I'm talking to you about Getaway, which is a project under our youth and education programs. Great. So at GCRP, our vision is a society where transport is inclusive, sustainable, and better connects people. Our mission is to make it easier for people to use sustainable transport. So what does this actually mean? I'm talking about equal playing field for individuals and communities to access opportunities. I'm talking about equity, acknowledging that different people have different needs. I'm talking about sustainability, trying to influence behavior change so that that behavior will be good for the climate, and also connecting people better and people and places better. I'm talking about easier in terms of mental, physical, and social aspects. Mental well-being, for example, is anxiety around travel or rail travel. Physical things such as accessibility, what's already there on train stations, but also onward travel from train stations. And in terms of social, thinking about how places make you feel and how people's attitudes towards you can make you feel. So to set the scene, I'm introducing you to Gloucester train station, which, as you can see here, is where we focused our project. And just 2 minutes walk from Gloucester train station, outlined here on the map, you can see is Barton and Tredworth. Barton and Tredworth is the most ethnically diverse ward in Gloucestershire, and it's classified as a highly deprived area nationally. And 41.4% of Barton and Tredworth population are from a diverse ethnic group, which I'm assuming is going to be slightly higher considering the latest census updates. So for almost all diverse ethnic groups, health-related quality of life is worse compared to white British people, and in some cases is equivalent of being 20 years older than your actual age. We all know the benefits of being in the outdoors, but only 1% of visitors to UK national parks come from BME backgrounds, although that only says about UK national parks. Generally speaking about rural spaces, only 26.2% of Black people spend time in the countryside compared with 44.2% of white people. And these two concerns about safety concerns and racial discrimination. There's a lot of research done around this, but I just wanted to talk about one sort of statistic, I suppose. It's not really a statistic, is it? It's just a piece of research. study in 2021 by the University of Surrey found that the fundamental constraint of the choices of British, Black and Asian travellers was actually safety concerns and racial discrimination. They always felt the need to identify how safe a destination is and to explore the prevalence of racism before they went anywhere. Interesting case study that you might want to look at is what happened to the Muslim hikers group. They are called Muslim hikers, and they were on Country File recently, and certain things happened. It might be interesting to look at that. So more than 9 in 10 journeys to national parks are made by car. But Black people are more than twice as likely as white people to live in a household with no access to car or van. A statistic from 2020 in Barton and Tredworth, 39% of households have no car, compared with 26% across England. So how do I bring these points together into a project? So underpinned by the belief that the countryside is for everyone, that young people should feel confident and independent whilst traveling by rail, we set out to develop opportunities for young people from diverse backgrounds to access the health and well-being benefits of being out in Gloucestershire's rural spaces. So how do we engage and empower? First, the research matches our idea, which was to take young people out on group trips to rural spaces. But what does the community actually want? So we started by building on personal relationships we had in the community, and through that approached organizations that are trusted in the Black and Brown community in Gloucester. We met them where they were rather than expecting them to approach us, and made sure that we were meeting the goals of the community organization so that we could build a collaborative partnership. We wanted to make sure that we weren't doing the project to them. It had to be through the community and not the other way around, because first, we didn't want to create any kind of power dynamic or top-down approach. So for example, how do we do this? We approached the Music Works, one of the community groups that all about music. So how do we input that into our project, which I will talk about a little bit later on. We communicated exactly what we were offering in terms of the project. So exactly what was the plan. So that was day trips out to rural spaces, what resources we have. So through the partnership, through train operating companies, and also what funding is available. But also asking, not presuming that the community group would have the resources to actually come on those trips with us. So do they have the staff? Do we need to fundraise to pay for staff costs, for example? So the initial premise is there, but we weren't prescriptive. We wanted the ideas to come from them. It's like any other relationship. You have to build trust, and trust takes time. How do you do that? You give young people the opportunity to co-design experiences as a group with trusted youth leaders from their own organizations. I also think about what the leaders' concerns, what are my concerns, and what can I do? So first, we had 2 cohorts, an older cohort from 16 to 25-year-old and a young cohort from 8 to 15 years old. We asked the cohort to name the project. So in their first session with their youth leader. So it was actually called Explore and Experience First, and they renamed it Getaway. So that gave them ownership of the project. The group leader that they trusted and felt safe with did workshops with them before and after trips so that their voices were heard and they could plan where they wanted to go after the initial first trip. So the young people and the organization wanted to bring in a creative element. And so they wanted to film vlogs on the trips and learn to film and edit on the trips and after. And so we put that into our funding application as well. With the younger group, it was really important to listen to the youth leaders. Just as an example, so we took a refugee group out on a trip to Stonehouse to do some canoeing. And the leader asked us if a few parent volunteers could come along to supervise, because the parents were really unsure about sending their children out on their own. If that was just me, I would have the question that if I went to that refugee group and said, we're doing this trip, it's only for young people, would they have had the confidence to say to me, actually, we're not comfortable with that. We want to be there with our children. So this is all about building trust. So I'm going to try and make it easier for them, especially on the back of the research I've done around racial discrimination and safety, and also on the back of my experience. I know what it's like to be stared at in rural spaces and being uncomfortable and being othered. And I also, I really feel the impact of being used as a tick box exercise to meet diversity and inclusion agendas of organizations. You know, you can feel when someone is inauthentic, and I don't want to do that to someone else. So because I'm able to empathize with that, I think that really breaks down a lot of barriers. I'm talking with the youth leaders from the beginning about these things. So things I would do. So I would do things like scope out an area beforehand if possible, but also think about the activities. So an example would be, we went to a water park with a group of young Muslim girls. And on their terms and conditions, it said you have to wear wetsuits. And my initial thought was, as a Muslim woman, was I wouldn't do that just because of my, because I want to dress modestly. And I talked with the group leader about it, and she said, yeah, that I'm concerned about that too. So I went back and asked the water park, is this necessary? And they said, no, actually, you can just wear whatever you want. And so that's great. And everyone had a great time on the day as well. So not being afraid to ask those questions to the group leaders, and hopefully getting to a place through building those connections and that trust, where the young people and the organization trust me enough to come to me with those concerns first, is actually where I want to get to. So I always engage station staff to make sure there's no public event clashes. Actually, this was really important in another trip that we did. One of the young people, we went out to the Forest of Dean from Gloucester, and one of the young people really didn't want to go because he was like, everyone is racist in the forest. And the youth leaders, they convinced him to go out because it was in a group setting. And actually, when the young people got on the train, there was a rugby match that day, and there were some drunk fans on the train, and some racist things were said to them. And actually having that safe person, their trusted youth leader there to diffuse the tension, made that situation a lot easier to deal with. I always make sure there's, for example, culturally appropriate food, or ask the group to organize and just invoice us rather than having to do it all myself. And also in terms of photo permissions, you see here, I use the back of people's heads more so than using people's faces in photos. So, you know, I'm not overusing the photos, or I'm being sensitive to vulnerable groups, and not always having them as the face of any marketing that we do. So the impact of building trust over time. So in year one, we did 10-day trips with 117 young people. New experiences, expanding horizons, learning new skills, building real confidence. And in year two, we did, so far, we've done 5-day trips for 121 young people. So why has this happened? Why have we doubled our numbers? It's because we have that confidence and that trust between those organizations. Actually, this year, one of the young people came to a youth leader from the Music Works and said, by the way, I found the only NBA approved basketball court, and it's in Melbourne, and that's a rural place. Can we do it through Getaway? And 33 young people turned up to that trip, which was a huge success. And we already started talking about year 3 plans with the community organizations. So, and they are recognizing our mission and our vision. So they want to build on the real education and independent travel aspect. They want to come to train stations half an hour earlier so that young people can buy their tickets themselves. Some groups have asked for longer residential trips so that they can explore natural spaces more. And as an organization, we're thinking about strategic partnerships. So we've talked to some community organizations about being the chosen partner on reducing carbon. And it's something that we're in discussion on. So to finish up, we're trying to make it easier for people to use public transport. Are we doing that on the back of these trips? So these are the comments that have come from the young people. I talked about the water park experience trip, and actually those groups had actually had the experience of being told, no, you're not allowed to do water activities because you wear a headscarf. So I actually had an amazing time on the day, didn't have any negative comments, and that, in terms of inclusion, that's amazing. Lots of young people acknowledging what it's like to be in natural spaces and acknowledging the health and well-being benefits, also the independent travel aspect. I'm scared of trains. I want to go on the train when I'm older. I want to go on the train on my own when I'm older, but this is comfortable because it's with friends. And, I got to go on the train without my parents. Also, I want to be out of my comfort zone and explore the Cotswolds. That's an amazing learning experience. A recent comment from a school trip that we did, the children had an amazing time and had the opportunity to experience a lot of firsts. It was a memorable trip and could not have been done without the support of GCRP, who are encouraging everyone to travel sustainably and hunt for these opportunities. So acknowledgement of our sustainable agenda. And I'm just going to play a vlog. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting that to play so quickly. But this was a vlog that was produced, edited and filmed by the young people at Music Fix. And thank you so much for listening.
That's great, Fatima. Really interesting presentation, and that leads us nicely on to Joe Green, Senior Consultant with Third Sector Network, for his presentation. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you ever so much, and thank you, Fatima, there. Fatima and I had not seen each other's presentation beforehand, but I just want to say she's done brilliantly there, feeding into some of the things I'm going to talk about now, which is going to seem wonderfully scripted, but it's honestly just a coincidence. Thank you ever so much for having me along today. My name is Joe Green, and I represent Third Sector Network. I've been invited along today to talk about community engagement, a sort of better community engagement, and so far, presentations that we've heard today have focused on the specifics of what different organizations are doing, the challenges they face, and they've been focusing on case studies. We've been looking at it in a very specific point of view. But particularly with Fatima's presentation there, this of course raises bigger questions and bigger things for everyone to think about. And what my role here at the end is to try and sort of boil that down into some sort of general thoughts and things to think about when it comes to community engagement, rather than focusing on specific examples. So when I talk to charities and third sector organizations about community engagement and better community engagement, I always sort of try not to get to the practicalities first, although I'll come to a little bit of that. I always ask people to sort of dial it back a bit, go back to the beginning and think about what they mean when they say community or community engagement, because it is a term that we all say very easily, say, oh, we want to do better at community engagement. Community engagement is very important to what we do. The community is at the core of what we do, and that's great. But I think sometimes when we sort of challenge ourselves to think about what we mean by community, it's not always quite as simple as we might think. So I want to start off by asking us sort of like understand the landscape of what we mean, and perhaps some of the mistakes that can be made when we think about different communities and the different communities that we serve and communities in general. So just to illustrate the kind of thing I'm talking about, let's look at some sort of what we think about commonly when we talk about different communities. So we've got some images here I'm going to share with you just to illustrate sort of examples, really. So we might talk about a local community, the local area we serve. Now, that might be in a borough in London, it might be a county, it might be a village or a surrounding area, but you could say people are part of this local community. They live in this local area. So this is their local community, and everyone within that community either is or can be a part of that community. And that's something we can all relate to, because, you know, whether you're in the Orkneys or whether you're in Falmouth, you know, you're part of a local area. But within those areas and within those sort of community of an area, you have other communities. So we have here a mosque and a Christian church. We have communities that are identified by the religion. So you might say we have the Muslim community or the Christian community or the Jewish community, the Buddhist community, whoever. You know, there are communities that are identified by religion, and we can all probably relate to this too. You might not be religious yourself in the slightest, but we can all understand that religion is a very sort of strong part of many people's identity and their community. I think we're very conscious of that in everyday life. But it goes beyond that as well. You have the LGBTQ plus community, and you might, you might see this in something like pride events and other occasions. But of course, this is a community that exists everywhere all the time. But we have that consciousness of that community, the LGBT plus community. And then, of course, beyond that, you have, this is a picture of Chinatown in Manchester, just there to, as one image to illustrate the many different communities that are identified by ethnic identity. Now, that might be because you're actually from a certain part of the world, or it might be, born and raised in this country, so were your parents, so were your grandparents, but going back, your family and your identity has an ethnic connection to a certain ethnic group. And that, of course, that list, of different ethnic groups, is incredibly long. And we can all understand these things, and we can all identify these things, and you might be part of one of these communities, or you might be part of both. But of course, these are what we do. We put these communities into boxes. You're part of the local community, you're part of the Muslim community, you're part of the LGBT plus community, you're part of the Chinese community, the Pakistani community. And just as I have done here on this screen, we put people into boxes. It's something we do as a society. It's something that you find all over the world, everywhere. It's an incredibly common practice, and it's we put people into boxes. You're a Muslim, so you're part of the Muslim community. You live in Hackney, so you're part of the Hackney community. Right, okay, so you're gay or lesbian or bisexual, you're part of the LGBT plus community. Ethnically Chinese, you're part of the Chinese community. And it makes it easier for people to say, you're in that box, you're in that box, you're over there. And it's often a subconscious thing we do. It's not necessarily a conscious choice if I'm putting you into this box and you into that box, but it's what we do. And we see this all over the place in day-to-day life. And yet, these are the communities we all think of, obviously. These are the things that are most prominent in our mind. But for many, a community they belong to isn't always something you can so readily identify. So for my final picture here, we have a generic image of some people in a professional workplace, could be any professional workplace. But you get people who are part of a community defined by the work that they do. So for example, if you're a member of a union, that is a community, a union of people brought together by their shared career within a certain workplace. You have a community of nurses. My wife is a doctor, and I can tell you that 90% of her friends are medical because she's part of that medical community. And people are part of all these kind of communities, but whilst it may always be obvious you're part of this local community because you live there, or you're part of this ethnic group because I can see you're part of this ethnic group, that isn't necessarily what defines people. Somebody might be ethnically Chinese and a Christian and part of the LGBTQ plus community and lives in this local area, but the thing that defines them is that they are a nurse. And they might say, well, yes, I'm ethnically Chinese, and yes, I'm gay, and I live in this area, but those are just parts of my identity. What really matters to me is my career. And yet what we do is we continue to put people into boxes. So when we see people out on the street and we engage with them and we encounter them, we can't help ourselves do it. We, you know, what community are you part of? So how can I talk to you in the language of your community? So you're part of the LGBT plus community. So therefore, everything we communicate with you must be in the context of, you know, sort of trying to be supportive of people in that community. Oh, you're ethnically whatever. So therefore, you know, we need to constantly bring it back round to that. You can't know by looking at someone what community defines them, the community that they're part of that matters to them most. And when we look at people on day-to-day life, when you see people standing on a platform or on a train or anywhere else, you can't know by looking at them the thing that matters them to the most. Yet in our head, so often as a society, you look at someone and you find a characteristic that puts them into a certain box and like, there we go. And like I said, it's a subconscious thing a lot of the time. But this notion of putting people into boxes means that because it makes it more simple for us all to understand, you can end up not really appreciating the things that matter to people the most. There are many people who are Muslim, but that is not the defining characteristic to their personality. There are people who are Black or Chinese, you know, ethnically, but that is not the thing that defines them. And so when it comes to engaging different communities, we have to go beyond saying, right, what box can we put you in? And see things as the whole. And you can only do this by actually talking to people and engaging with people and understanding what matters to them. Now, the most common example of how we do this as a society is with monitoring forms. So I'm going to show you an example here. And this is something I got off the internet. And this is a form from British Transport Police for their diversity monitoring form. And the form on the left is the form as the whole, and the form on the right is just magnified because I'm conscious you may not be able to see the detail in the smaller one. And if you want to join the British Transport Police, which covers north, south, east, and west, you have to fill in one of these forms. And at first glance, it may not seem particularly problematic. It's asking people to identify certain elements of, you know, their sort of, you know, who they are and how they identify themselves. But again, by putting people into boxes, what you can end up doing is excluding others. So for example, here, let's look at the section that says Asian or Asian British. So do you identify as being Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, or any other Asian background? Now, at the bottom, they have identified Chinese as well. So what that means is if you're ethnically Indian, Pakistani, or Bangladeshi, you've got a box to tick. But if you're Afghan or Japanese, ethnically, you have to tick the same box. There are 4.5 billion people living in Asia currently. And yet this form would say, right, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, or Chinese, we want to know about you individually, but everyone else, you're all in the same box. Likewise, if we look, Black or Black British background, is your ethnicity or background Caribbean? Okay, we've got a box for that. African, well, we're going to put Algerian and South African in the same box because, well, that's pretty much the same thing. You're from Africa, aren't you? I mean, take a moment to consider how absurd that is. It's a little bit like saying to someone, right, where are you from? You're from the Isle of Skye. Thank you. Where are you from? You're from Istanbul. Well, that's the same, isn't it? But that's what you would be saying if you're saying European. And yet these boxes have no problem saying that. Now, I do appreciate there are practical elements to this, and that someone might make the not entirely invalid point that, well, what are you suggesting? We put every single nation on earth on the form. The form will be 27 pages long. And I'm not suggesting that's necessarily the thing that you have to do. But the reason that they haven't done that on this form is not because they think this is the best way to do it. It's because this is the most convenient way to do it, because putting, I'm going to show my ignorance by not knowing how many different countries there are in the world, but let's say 200, because putting 200 boxes is too much of a faff. Religious beliefs, we've listed all the main ones, inverted commas, main ones, anything else, other. With gender identity, male, female, if you don't identify as either male or female, well, that has to go down as prefer not to say, which then puts it into a box of something as if you don't talk about it. Now, that's not to suggest, like I said, that this document has been born out of some, prejudice or anything like that, but it's been born out of a desire to come up with a system that works for the employer. This works well for British Transport Police. It gives them the information they need, but it has not been designed, despite what they might say, to work in the best interest of the people who are filling the form in, which is what forms like this should do. Now, do I have the answer for exactly what you should put for a form? Well, no, I'm not pretending I do. But what this brings us round to is this really difficult challenge that when we're trying to understand the different communities that people come from and the different backgrounds and the cultural differences between communities, too often what we do is we think, right, how can we just make it so it works for us? So we can show that we're engaging different communities and we can show that we're diverse, rather than thinking, what do different communities need? You know, I said, take a second to think, is there a problem with saying Indian, Pakistani or Bangladeshi, we want to know about that, but everything else, it's all just the same box? Male or female, we can get our head around that. Anything that's not male or female, let's just put it all in the same box. And this is where you get to the problem of not understanding and not taking the time to appreciate the differences between communities. And so often, and again, I am sympathetic to this, but so often the case is that when people look at how to address different communities and engage different communities, what starts to make you hesitate is a fear of causing offense. So you might get to the question about gender identity and say, well, I understand difference between male and female. I'm just not entirely sure what to put for the other box. Well, because I don't want to offend anyone, so let's not put anything at all. Let's just put prefer not to say. But as I like to refer to it, sort of community engagement 101, not knowing how to engage a certain community is your issue. It's your job to resolve it, which might seem a bit harsh to say. But I'm pretty sure everyone here would say, well, I don't want to put people into boxes. I don't want to just say, right, well, you're ethnically Chinese, you're LGBTQ+, and so on and so forth. So if you're thinking, well, how can we work on this? And the answer isn't immediately obvious. The answer is not, well, let's just stick with what we know. The answer is, well, let's talk, let's engage with different communities and say, right, how can we make sure we're representing different organizations differently? Because if you shy away from it and say, well, this is a delicate subject and I don't want to cause offense, I would say to anyone that if you exclude a certain community, any community from something, because you're scared of causing offense, that isn't respecting that community. Saying we're going to do something differently, or we're not going to engage the Muslim community in a certain way because I'm conscious that this might be delicate issue, so therefore we're just going to shy away from it. That's not respecting that community, that's just excluding them. And likewise, for any community, if you choose not to engage fully because it's difficult, that is not inclusion, that's exclusion. So when you're thinking about different communities and how you engage them and the communities that you support, and it'll be different from area to area, the communities that feature the most, when you think about this, it's all about taking the time to think, how can we create a system that is genuinely inclusive, where we treat everyone evenly based on the things that matter to them, not how can we create a system of considering our community engagement based on ticking a box, and therefore by putting people into boxes. So that's how I would invite people to think about it. Let's talk about how you can actually go about it from a practical point of view, how to engage communities successfully. Now, this sort of feeds back to something, I think it was Colin, forgive me if I got the name wrong, Colin asked a question about how do you know how to reach out to people? How do you know where to start with this? I apologize if that's paraphrasing your question slightly, Colin, but that's how I'm going to take it to segue nicely into this. I'd like to just tell you a brief story, a completely true story. I was supporting a charity a few years back, and this charity helps people who are in financial difficulty and financial distress. And it operates in a part of England that is one of the most ethnically diverse parts of the entire UK. And yet this organization had historically really struggled to engage people outside the white British community. And so they brought me in and they said, well, can you help us with this? And I said, well, I'm not particularly local, but I'm happy to try and help you with it. And I said, they said, well, we've tried doing different types of ad campaigns. We've tried to do campaigns that are aimed at different sort of communities and are geared up differently. And I said, well, let's stop for a second. If you want to engage a certain community, you're just sitting yourself in your own little isolated box, trying to think of a way of doing it. Reach out to the community. So I said, who already has these communities' attention? And I said, have you spoken to the local MP? He said, no, we haven't. And I said, well, listen, you can't become elected an MP in this local area unless you have successfully engaged these communities that you've struggled in. So this MP will know where to start. So I got a sit-down meeting with the local MP. I said, hello, I'm representing this charity that helps people in financial difficulty. They've really struggled to engage these communities in the constituency that you support. I wonder if you could just give us some hints and tips as to how you think we can engage them more effectively. And I was expecting them to have a bit of back and forth and dialogue, but without hesitating for a second, she said, bus stop ads. We're going to use bus stop ads. When I'm sitting with an MP here, so I can't, in my mind, what I'm thinking is, oh my goodness, bus stop ads, really? This is the age of digital marketing and social media and things like that. Bus stop ads, it's not the 1980s. But of course, because I'm sitting with an MP, what actually came out of my mouth was, that's bus stop ads, that's really interesting. Tell me more about it. What do you mean by that? And she said, well, do you know what the car ownership rate amongst these communities are? Well, I wasn't particularly local to the area, so I said, oh, no, I don't. She said that these communities have amongst the lowest car ownership rates in the country, but certainly in the area. So I thought, oh, right, okay, so what, in my head, I'm thinking, so what you're thinking is people in these communities use buses more, so if you advertise on buses, more people in that community will see them. The problem is, though, just to serve that entire area, there's probably 300 bus stops in that area. And I said, oh, yes, I see where you're going now. That's a great idea. Yet the problem is this organization, they've got a really limited budget. They advertising on bus stops is quite expensive, actually, it really is. Quite expensive. So they couldn't afford to cover that entire area. She looked at me like I was, talking utter nonsense. Turns out I was. And she said, oh, no, you only need to use 3 bus stops. Well, at this point, all pretense needed to drop. She clearly knew what she was talking about. I didn't have a clue what I was talking about. So I stopped pretending to make notes. I was like, I'm afraid you've lost me. So 3 bus stops? Why? How will 3 bus stops do this? She says, well, do you know who the employers are for people in this area? No. She said, there's 3 really large factories in the area, and around about 60% of the working age adults in that area work in those 3 factories. Still wasn't getting it. I was like, right. She said, yeah, do you know where those factories are? No, I'm not local. She says, they're all on one long road. They're all next to each other. They're all garment factories, and they're all one next to each other on one road that's about 1 kilometre long. And she said, all those factories are served by 3 bus stops. So people may be coming from all over the city to go to these factories, but they all use one of these 3 bus stops outside to go home. Like, blimey, this is starting to make sense. But then she went even further and she said, and of course, bus stop advertising would be perfect for the kind of thing you're talking about. Really? Why? She said, well, do you ever use the bus? Well, I had to be honest and say, no, I don't. I drive everywhere. I don't live in the city. I drive absolutely everywhere. And she said, well, when you come out of work and you're standing at the bus stop and you go up to the bus and there's about 5 minutes till your bus comes along, you're tired, you've done a full day at work, you've got to go home. Maybe the kids are driving you mad. You've got to do loads of housework when you get home. No one comes out of it in a particularly joyous mood, and you stand there and you've got 5 minutes till your bus comes along. What do? You get your smartphone out or something. But when you're there at the bus stop, that's when things start going through your mind. You start to worry about things. Oh, hard day at work. I'm tired, but I've got to pay the bills tonight and I'm struggling. And oh my goodness, how am I going to pay for Christmas this year? Or it's my wife or my child's birthday next week. Where am I going to get the money? When you're standing at a bus stop at a loose end and you just want to get home, the things that are stressing you out in your life all start to come out. So at that moment, if you say to someone, are you struggling financially? Then we can help. You've got the exact audience you're trying to engage at exactly the right moment. She'd showed me up completely. I'd gone in there looking for just little hints and tips, but what she had was the insight and the understanding into these communities as to what their concerns were, where they went.
Colin, sorry, Joe.
Yes.
Just a quick time check. We were overrunning slightly. You've got about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Don't worry.
Okay, good.
Okay. So what she gave me was that information I needed to engage with community. So when you're thinking about this yourself, you want to start thinking not because how can we do the same that we always do, but just aim it at different communities. You want to start trying to take the time to understand these communities better. What are the worries, challenges, barriers of these communities, and how can we show that our service engages with that? I think I understand the local area because I've lived here for a while, but is that demographic profile changing? The Census 2021 data is coming out now. Just because you think you know your local area, is it the same as it always was? Are certain communities growing, shrinking, moving? When you want to work out how to engage a different community, who already has this community's attention, and go and look at them. Don't think about how to do what you're doing. Look at who already has the communities you're trying to engage with, their attention, and how can you harness what they do right with your own. And then when you've got those topics, those themes that you've crafted by looking elsewhere and taking the time to understand, you then say, right, the communities we want to engage, where are they? When are they in these locations, and how can we physically make that connection? When you start to work these things out, suddenly the mystery as to how to engage different communities starts to come together like a jigsaw in the image. Because remember, when it comes to looking at different communities and the communities you serve, maps, stats and graphs rarely tell the whole story on their own. It's about talking to people in the local community. Covering a whole area saying, well, we leaflet here and we go there, that's not enough. You need to engage and talk to people, because if you think you understand your local community, but you've never properly taken the time to go and talk to people and engage with them and say, tell us about your troubles, your struggles, tell us what, you know, your day-to-day life is like, you can't expect your service to cater to that. So to finish, what I would ask everyone to think about with their community engagement going forward is 4 questions. Do you sufficiently understand your objective? You want to engage communities more effectively? Why? What is it you're trying to actually achieve? What is it you want to help these communities with? Question number 2, how well do you know your local area? Never assume just because you've lived in a local area, you know it like the back of your hand. Look at census data, look at council data, talk to local leaders and say, this is my perception. Is that backed up by reality? Do I know where to look for the information I need? There's an absolute wealth of information out there that will give you information on communities, community changes in demographics, all these things. The information is out there. Do I know where to find it? And then finally, do I know where I want to be? Because being better at community engagement is not, like I said, about putting people into boxes and saying, right, well, we can show that we're trying to identify. It's through actions. So say, right, what do we actually want to achieve? We want to achieve more engagement with this community. How are we going to measure that? Let's set ourselves targets, because when it comes to understanding communities, it goes far beyond simply identifying different boxes and showing that you're trying. It's about taking the steps out into the community, talking to the right people, understanding the practical reality, and making sure you understand how what you are offering is crafted to help and support those communities. Thanks everyone ever so much for your attention. I'm now going to pass back to Sarah, and if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thanks so much, Joe. That's great. Right, loads more food for thought. So I'm going to open up immediately to you guys and see if we've got any questions either in the chat or if we've got any hands raised. Just having a quick look. I haven't seen anything, although Hazel and Hannah come in and tell me if I've missed anything in the chat.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything thus far, but people can ask, they can raise a hand, can't they, and ask live. So yeah. So any questions for Fatima or Joe? I think we answered the ones for Dawn and Julia, didn't we, previously? Oh, we've got a hand raised.
Yeah, Gary.
Hi, a question for Fatima. There's some very powerful statistics at the start of your presentation around access to the countryside for BAME groups, and indeed access to motor vehicles, and the numbers of motor vehicle journeys going into the countryside, or specifically national parks. And I'm hopeful you'll be able to share the source for those. But that's really the question. Is there a nice, easy to access source you can share with us?
Yeah, I think a few of them aren't on the presentation, so I'll have to send them out later on. But yes.
That's great, Fatima, thank you.
Sarah, can I just jump in there? I'm conscious the question was for Fatima, but can I just add one little thing?
Of course.
People who are looking for information on how to serve local communities and get identity on areas, a really good source is what's called the Index of Multiple Deprivation. It's a government provided source, and it will give you, by the postcode, really incredibly valuable information as to which areas have different issues with different things such as transport and other areas. It'll narrow it down to postcode. If you simply Google it, there's one for England, one for Wales, one for Scotland, Northern Ireland. If you simply Google it, the Index of Multiple Deprivation, it's accessible through an Excel spreadsheet, and it's an absolute goldmine for information on different areas down to postcode level.
That's brilliant, Joe. And I suspect that Hazel and Hannah are going to stick a link in the chat on that as well. I can see them beavering away looking at their screens. So watch out for that as well. But yeah, that's great. Okay, any other questions? Never known. It's so quiet.
No, indeed.
Oh, I think Colin's got his hand up. So if you want to bring Colin in, please.
I unmuted my, there we go. Hello again. One point I'd like to make, I live in a predominantly white county. Worcestershire is 96% white. And Joe's point about social deprivation is very significant because we have areas in the wild forests and so on whose social deprivation is as good as, if I make as a comparator, with Treadworth. There are significant areas of people and the point about putting people in boxes is a very valid thing. We've found that we are able to reach out to people more significantly, either through a school or through social clubs or anything else. Even sports clubs are the sort of areas you can make contact with people. And a lot of people in socially deprived areas, the one thing they do like to do is kick a ball around, play basketball, do anything else other than the traditional areas of sitting in a pub and drinking a pint.
I think, can I just briefly come back on that? Because I think what Colin said there is really interesting about how deprivation in areas like the area we've just spoken about. I'm conscious of time, but one of the things that I do in a presentation that I do, I don't know whether a little bit of fun is the right way of looking at it. I use that information on the index of deprivation. And I always ask people in the room, I say, you know, I'm looking at these different areas, but who wants to have a guess where the most deprived postcode in England is and the least deprived postcode? And I ask the room and people guess, and people always say the same sort of answers generally. They say the least deprived postcode, they give London ones or Kent or Surrey, and the most deprived is always in the north of England, always without fail. I've never had an answer that's not the north of England. And yet, according to that data that I've referenced, the most deprived postcode, apologies if anyone lives there, I really do apologise. The most deprived postcode in England is Clacton down in Essex, and the least deprived is in Sheffield. Because these things factor in, it's not just who's got the most money. There's lots of millionaires in Kensington and Chelsea, but there's a huge amount of deprivation there as well. And like Colin referenced, some deprivation issues. I think a lot of people think that rural England, Scotland and Wales is just lovely country cottages, and it's like, you know, remains of the day kind of a thing. But these misconceptions, you know, oh, where do you live? I live in rural England. Oh, so you're wealthy. It's absolutely not borne out by the data at all. Some of the most deprived areas are in some of the wealthiest counties and areas, and some of the least deprived are in the north of England. But perception remains north poor, south rich.
Yeah, it harks back to what you were saying, I guess, Joe. In and around those, we like to put these kind of like boxes around our communities, and often we'll go for those very easily identifiable boxes that we can see. But actually, social deprivation is an area which is really hard to see, and we can all be guilty of making assumptions without kind of really looking closely within our own communities and asking those questions. And I think what Colin was just saying as well about how they've got lots of information and guidance by talking within their local communities to schools and to sports clubs and groups helps to raise that awareness and that understanding of some of those perhaps community dynamics that we haven't automatically thought of. And it kind of reiterates the point you made about talking to the local MP and gathering that source of information there. But by talking within our local communities, we can often gather really useful information that sits outside of those index kind of statistics. So yes.
Yeah, you should never rely solely on data or solely on just chatting to people. Use both of them and then compare the two to get that fully rounded picture.
Yeah. Hannah's got her hand up.
It was only just to highlight something I was going to drop into the chat and to pick up on a point that I think came up in a couple of presentations. It's some links to information and background on power dynamics, because I think that's such a key part of this whole topic, which is incredibly complex, as all of you have so brilliantly illustrated. And I know very little about it, but a tiny amount from a course I did on responsible tourism and about engaging communities in that respect. So if you have time and you're interested, it's really useful to dig a bit deeper behind the actual engaging the communities, understanding who the communities are, identifying who you want to talk to, and understanding the role of power and how people assume power is given to certain others and where they sit in a power table and all these things. It's quite, yeah, it's quite interesting, and it really would help feed into some of the work that you might go on and do. So I'll just drop some links in, and if you want to Google power dynamics, there's a huge wealth of stuff out there. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that is, Hannah, thank you.
And there's a couple of comments from Andy Pope in the Q&A box, Sarah, if I can read certainly one of those out. Andy says there really is no replacement for knocking on doors, doing your research. Joe's presentation gave me some useful tips about targeting, and he says he's also seeing a certain demographic at their steering groups, that is to say older train enthusiast, and I'd love to widen that. So it wasn't really questions but comments.
Yeah, yeah, I think, Andy, I think you're right in terms of that kind of like knocking on doors and having conversations with people. And again, echoing some of the comments in both Fatima and Joe's presentations about engaging with those communities and not shying away from asking questions if you don't know, and making sure that you're being inclusive by asking them the right questions and not making assumptions. And I think it's always tricky because I think we're all very busy and we're often part-time within this sector, and finding the time to make those partnerships and connections, they can take time. But I do think picking up the phone, having an online meeting, having a conversation and getting that dialogue going can really open doors in terms of increasing your understanding, but hopefully also bringing other partners into the work that you're doing. And I think we've heard a lot of that today from the different speakers, and yeah, it's been really interesting. I've really enjoyed all the presentations, and I think some of the panelists have actually taken things from each other. And Dawn Lyles just commented she's got to go because she's hosting a webinar at 12 actually. Thank you, Dawn. She's really hoping to put Fatima's ideas into action ASAP. So just to let you know that, Fatima. Yeah. Okay, so sorry, go on, Fatima.
I was just going to say, it always takes more time to engage communities than you think it is. So actually just writing up a funding application and saying, this is what we're going to do, and we are going to have done everything in 6 months. It might take you 6 months to actually get the right person in the community that engages the rest of the community. So it's really important to bear that in mind.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of thinking about the long game, because you might approach a particular group within your own community about a particular project, but actually the longevity of making that partnership and what it will bring to future projects and future planning that you do as an organisation can be really weighty and valuable. So yeah, I agree, Fatima. I think it does take a lot of time, but it's really worth the effort if you can get some good partnerships and good links within your community, because it just continues to build and build and build. Okay, so if we've got no other hands up, which I don't think we do, and there's nothing more in the chat or questions, which I don't think there is. I'm looking at Hazel and Hannah, and I think they're agreeing.
I can't see anything, but just to let everybody know, and I think you're going to mention this anyway, Sarah, that everybody's presentations will be available afterwards, and the recording will be available, and all the panelists are happy for people to contact them directly if there's any further questions later or they want to pick their brains.
Brilliant, thanks.
One thing I'm just doing very quickly is right back to the beginning, dropping the link to the bursary in the chat for anybody who wanted to pick up on that, which I got to do at the start.
That's great. Well, in which case I'll do a quick wrap up and just to say a huge thank you to everybody who's joined us today, particularly our panelists and their really interesting presentations, and for all those of you who've contributed to the conversations today. I think everyone's going to be going away with some valuable lessons and things to pick up on and move forward within their own groups. If, as the team's already said, if there is anything that comes to you after the presentation, you can either drop us an email to share your comments or any questions you've got, send that through to events@communityrail.org.uk, and obviously if any of the panelists have put their details on their slides, they're happy for you to contact them directly. Hannah has already reminded you about the training bursary and that link going in there. So again, if this is an area that you feel that you could do a bit more, get a bit more help and support on, and there's some training out there that you'd like to access, we do have a bursary that can support that. All the information is on the training and development page of our website. Do keep an eye out for our 2023 programme of events that will be getting updated as time moves on. So keep looking at the Community Rail website and the events diary, as dates and topics will be popping up there. And the final reminder is feedback, your feedback from today's event. We really appreciate getting your comments about the good, about ways in which we can improve and develop moving forward. It's a really short feedback survey. It will pop up at the end of the webinar. If you're able to complete it, that would be great, because it helps us with our future planning. So and I think it will probably get popped in the chat as well, a link there. So yeah, thank you again to everybody, wishing you all well until next time, and I think I can actually say have a good festive period for those of you who will be celebrating. We're now in December, it feels okay to say that, and goodbye from me and the rest of the team, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thanks very much.